You're listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.
I'm Scott.
And I'm Hamish.
And today Hamish is going to talk about brand structure. Apparently there's 3 types of brand structure, and something I was never aware of, but Hamish is going to tell us all about it and explain to us what they are. Take it away, Hamish.
It's all secret branding business. No, Scott. Thanks for that. In order for people to understand how brands work and how they might work with their invention and building companies, I've broken it down into a more easy to understand way of looking at the world in terms of marketing, and that is with the 3 brand structures. One is relatable, one is aspirational, and the other is functional. Now, to go back a step, relatable brands are things like Woolworths and Coles. So these are brands that, when I say relatable, they're more or less a peer to the marketplace. They're not trying to be something that they're not. They're not trying to scare people off. They're not also trying to undersell their message. So you're talking about price points which they don't really bat an eyelid in that sense. I know this is all broadly speaking.
You're talking about the customer doesn't bat an eyelid when they buy from Woolworths or Coles. They've got an understanding that they're going to get good value from that brand.
Yeah, it's almost what you'd call, and it's probably not the right way to describe it, bread and butter companies. So you've got companies that
consumer based,
general consumers. So you're not trying to be something that you're not. You're not trying to present an image which is, again, which we'll talk about next, is aspirational. That's a different kettle of fish altogether. So relatable brands, you set yourself up because you just want people to accept it on their own level. They're very much talking to consumers as peers. So they're not trying to convey a higher price point, they're not trying to convince someone to buy in at a higher price, and they're also not trying to convince you that it's a lower price. So you've got brands which are functional, which we'll get into later, which are almost cut price.
Yeah.
So relatable brands,
consumer level pricing. Is that what you say there?
Well, it's all dependent on the market,
yeah.
but relatable brands, the target market, you're not trying to convince them otherwise that this is something that you need and you have to pay a high price for.
Sure.
It's almost like commoditized. Commodities.
Yep.
So that's another way.
Price based.
Yes.
Marketing.
Well, it's all price based, but when I'm talking about relatable brands, though, you're not trying to scare people off. So you're selling commoditized products, and the messaging and the marketing that comes along with that does its level best.
So almost every...
So consumers identify very easily with the offering, and that comes down to when you walk through the door, like Woolies and Coles. You're not walking into somewhere and going, "Oh my God, wow!" You're just going, "This is comfortable. This is fine. It's clean. There's no smell.
Yeah.
It's not the decor is neither cheap or expensive."
So chain stores basically. So you've got Bunnings, BCF, all the sort of companies that are really trying to
more or less
get consumers.
Yes. So
sell more.
Yeah, but the point I'm making here when we're talking about entrepreneurs is if you're going after a general market and the invention that you've got or the problem that you're solving is not necessarily going to be positioned as something which is going to be high price, high value, exclusive, well then you have to work on being relatable. So everything that you do in your marketing, your messaging, you need to be you need to come across as a peer to the customer. The next type of brand structure is aspirational. Now, you think of any luxury goods, expensive cars. You're talking about things like Bentley, Tom Ford, even things like Rolex. I was looking at some ads, have managed to bump into some ads on Instagram the other day for Rolex, and again, the way they market, it's all what I'd say mythology driven. So they're still products. I mean, a Bentley will get you from A to B, no problem, but is it relatable to the general market? No, they can't be. You cannot sell a car for $500,000 plus. It's not a relatable product. It is an aspirational product, and you rely on your marketing creating a lot of mythology and a lot of, I wouldn't say misunderstanding, but certainly people look at those vehicles and luxury brands and think, "Oh, wow, I wonder what that's like." And the people that buy them for that reason, because they know that what they're buying is aspirational for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's the value of the branding that goes into those products.
Increasing the perceived value of that product.
Yes, and that's the only right way you can really have very high pricing above average. I mean, it's not like the Hyundai, the Toyotas and all those sorts of things. They're relatable products. People that buy those are not necessarily image conscious. Obviously, it's budget driven. I mean, a lot of people might not, might prefer the Bentley, wouldn't we all? But the problem is you need to have a product which is still comes in as a peer. It's a peer-related product. Toyota, Hyundai, all that, like Kia, they're all designed to fit a particular price point. They're not trying to be something they're not. The Bentley, the Rolls-Royce, even the Mercedes, I mean, they're all aspirational products, and everything they do, the way they talk, the marketing, it's got nothing to do with A to B. It's got nothing to do with how much. It's not how big the boot is. It's how much effort has gone into with things like we've spoken about this before. The effort they put into how the glove box opens and shuts, and we're back to the binocular grease, all those sorts of things. Well, that's the sort of thing you got to look at.
The seats,
all of that.
Every fine detail.
And even down to the way they would market. They actually sometimes, I know Rolls-Royce does it. They'll focus on one of the craftsmen that puts one of the pinstriping by hand down the side of each car that comes out of the factory. All that relates to the mythology of these brands. Obviously, it's really funny because you talk to people that service these cars, work with those sorts of cars. I mean, they have just the same number of problems as normal cars, and they become a pain in the ass sometimes. But still, the mythology exists, and that's what makes them. That's what enables those companies to sell them at such a high price.
I mean, I know some people who have cars, and it's a status symbol to be able to own them because it's so expensive to maintain them.
Well, there you go. But that's also part of that.
I can afford to maintain this vehicle.
Well, again, yeah. So that's but coming back to, I mean, we're not just analysing brands that already exist and saying, well, hey, that's what we'll call an aspirational brand. It's about, as an entrepreneur, if you're going to set up a company and then design a product in such a way, you've got to choose where you sit in terms of your positioning. So it all comes back down to how you're going to market, the sort of message that you need to manage. So if you're relatable, you've got to think about how that works. If you want to be aspirational, as in the price point you want to charge for your product is a lot higher than what your competitors, I mean, everyone's got competitors, even if it's a unique product. We'll go into that in a later podcast, but you've still got to go, okay, how is that going to work? How do we build mythology, for instance, into our marketing? It's not hard to do. It's just a matter of you've got to decide to do it or not.
And from a product perspective, you'll be incorporating details in that product design that aim towards that market. So you'll be going to the extra effort, different materials, different process. Probably more components that are unnecessary, but add to the user function in ways that normally you wouldn't be able to afford in the consumer market.
And it's interesting. I'll talk about Rolex again. I found some ads on Instagram I bumped into, and it was just interesting to watch these ads. And when you get down to it, I mean, it's just a watch. I mean, it's a well-made watch, but what they were pushing, the message was the celebrities that they'd chosen to talk about their Rolex and how they, it was kind of a bit funny. It was a bit sort of kitsch in the end, because they were talking about how the watch is the one constant in their life, and they've got these amazing jobs. They're talking to movie directors, and they're always on time, and it never fails them. And you think, well, hang on a minute, that's all they're doing there, and it's clever. They're just building up the mythology. It's got nothing to do about telling the time. I mean, a digital watch is going to tell the time better than a Rolex, because it's digital. There's no moving parts. You don't have to wind it up, but you can't sell a Casio for what they sell a Rolex for, and obviously there are even more expensive brands than that. So but again, it's all just coming down to how you need to price, the market image you need to build up. So again, you're looking at those brands, it's how they talk about themselves, how they talk about the product, who they align with. And we should really move on to the next structure, which is functional brands. There's a lot of good functional brands out there, and they're set up as such. I mean, one of the ones that I've observed over the last few years is Costco. Costco is a perfect example of a functional brand. I mean, it's not just about price. I mean, they're obviously an organisation which is their main attraction for the market is pricing, so obviously buying bulk, but everything that they do and say all conforms to functionality. I mean, it's interesting when you talk to people that work in there. For instance, I remember going to the one at North Lakes here in Brisbane, or north of Brisbane I should say, and they were selling this enormous spa bath. Like you'd have to cart it out of the Costco showroom on the back of a semi-trailer almost. And I asked someone, I said, what happens if I want to buy that? I mean, it's, I can't remember, it was about $20,000. So it was pretty cheap considering the size of this thing. It was like half the size of an Olympic swimming pool, really. It wasn't that big. But they said, oh, look, the way we work, you want it, you buy it, you take it out of here. And so I thought that's funny, and because they're actually selling a boat on the back of a trailer, so obviously that's a bit easier to take away. But their model the business model is also reflected in their branding, the way they speak, is they're not going to help you get that out of the shop. You want that, it's significantly cheaper than anywhere else, you take it away. So, and you walk into that place, it's air conditioned, that's all you get, but it's just pallets on the ground. And all they do is put a pallet on the shelf, unwrap it, you have to buy 50 of them because that's the price point that they can afford to sell it to you at for less, so they make a profit. So it's all purely about functionality. And also the way they work in terms of checkouts and things like that, it's all hugely managed, and they get you out of the shop as quickly as possible. They check everyone, security wise when you're exiting, so they check your receipt, make sure everything adds up. And it's kind of a bit, if you're used to, it's almost like you're proven guilty until you've until they check what's in your trolley. But again, people don't mind because it's a functional brand. Everything they don't do that at Woolworths. There's no one that checks you as you go out the last door into the car park. It's not that sort of brand. That's a relatable brand. So, that's the extra security is not something that you'd really be wanting to come across. But certainly, Costco. And there's obviously 1,000 other examples, but that's just one that.
It's really good information. I mean, if you can pick one of those areas in the initial, before you start design, you'll be far better off, because you'll be aiming. When we try and pick the market, I didn't know what the names were, but we always try and pick a market for where we can aim the product at, because we know that's going to come to the design. Yeah. And if you can find out, name those areas, it's great. You put a name to it, and we can aim towards it. Yeah, it's good information.
Well, I suppose we go back to the old days. I mean, you don't really see it that often, but I remember when Woolies and Coles had their own things like Black and White. Or Black and Gold, I should say, and Savings brand, and or Home brand. They were functional. They were just purely functional products. They were cheap. The quality of the product was reflected in the packaging sometimes, but you see Woolworths has moved away from that. They've got their own brand, and it's very well camouflaged. But that's because the market's changed. They've now brought it back to the fact that the people that come through the doors want something which is relatable. If they want something that's functional, they will go somewhere else, because Aldi is sort of verging on it's more relatable and functional, so it's not like you have to choose one or two. I mean, you can choose anywhere in between these. I mean, obviously you couldn't have aspirational and functional as much, but certainly relatable and functional, that's where Aldi sits on that scale. So there is a particular price point that you expect. It is nice and clean again, but there's more branding that goes on with their home products. I mean, let's face it, they're all Aldi products that are on their shelves. They're not selling anyone else. Well, very few products that they sell are established external brands. They're all home brand. So it's interesting. I think it's just for entrepreneurs and people starting the design process, you've just got to at least think about these three types of structures and where you might sit positioning wise, because it'll make your life a lot easier as you move forward.
Is it possible for a company to start as a relatable product brand and then move into an aspirational product brand, or backwards? Or is it just all of a sudden impossible to shift that niche?
Well, if you're talking about individual products, no, I wouldn't have thought. I can't off the top of my head think of any products that's gone from. Well, no, actually, no, that's not true.
Well, the home brand thing's a little bit the same. I mean, some of the product was the same, just packaged differently. I know the alcohol industry is very much like that. Whereas, I mean, everything that's alcoholic, spirits-wise, is basically ethanol with a different boutique in it. and the packaging is what differentiates it, and the story, the mythology that goes with it. The 50 years sitting in a barrel, all that sort of business comes into it hugely with alcohol. So I guess,
what
one
I can say
product, which is almost the same with a different botanic in it, might be aimed at lower market, and then one might be aimed at higher market.
A lot of that's governed by market trends. What you've just described is how markets can shift with changing trends. I mean, it's a bit like for a number of reasons it's happened, but in Australia there's a huge gin market because whiskey became a big deal. Like you were just talking about before, you've got ethanol that sits in barrels. You leave it in the barrel for 20 years, it's worth a lot more than it was just sitting there for 5 years and 8 years. So, but what's happened in Australia with the reason we've got so many gin brands when you walk into a bottle shop is because so many people have started distilleries to make whiskey, because there's a huge demand for whiskey. However, how do you make money in the meantime? You make gin, because that's almost instantaneous. Yeah. Once you produce the alcohol, you've really just got to flavour it. It's obviously a lot more to it than that, but all of a sudden gins have become flavour of the month. So the shift in trends, you've gone from things like your Beefeaters and your London dry gins, which were really, let's just say they're sold between $25 and $30 a bottle. You're now getting gins on the market which are selling between $80 and sometimes $180 a bottle, I think, in some instances, because the way they branded it, because of the shift in the trend, they've become aspirational. They haven't gone from being relatable or functional to aspirational in that sense, but just the market itself has seen that particular product type as being an aspirational thing. So that's where products can go from being one to the other, is really from market pressure and market change.
So from what I take out of this is that people are buying a story rather than a product generally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose if you're looking at, that's the thing. Each of these brand structures.
Is that marketing in a nutshell?
Well, it is marketing in a nutshell. But I suppose what you've just said, yes. Every one of these different types of brand structures. Don't think for a second that if you're functional, or you need to be functional, you don't have to have a story, because that sounds like it's a bit fancy. It just happens to be that your story is told every time you've got an opportunity to tell that story, and the story could be a sign, the story could be the way your staff interact with customers. That story has to reflect. How's that reflecting functionality more so than anything else? Yeah. Because that reflects your price
Completely
point.
Obvious. You walk into a big Barnes type supermarket store with very limited air conditioning, you know what's going to be inside it. You know what you're there for.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that some of these organisations, I have to admit, their brand is the result of organic growth. No one has really sat down and gone, well, this is our story, this is how we manage it. Very few companies have done that, from day one. It's just that they end up starting on a good idea. And a lot of the products you deal with, Scott, the market will speak. You've always said that. The market will speak. The market will give you feedback as you go. So you still got to get it on the shelf. But if you can capture where you need to be before you start that process, you've got a much better chance of not wasting money.
Yeah.
And you've got and using that, as Michelle was saying a few weeks ago, the scattergun approach. If you don't really know where you sit on the scale of any of these brand structures, then you're just guessing.
Guessing, a bit deadly.
And it's like one of the products that we're both familiar with in this room that, they've used the scattergun approach. Great product, but all of a sudden they've found 50 markets for it. They should have just stuck to the 2 or 3. So you're jumping around too much. You can't do that, because if you want to become successful financially, you have to go, right, this is where we're at. You will never see Mercedes and Bentley and Rolls-Royce and all those other fancy brands going, well, they do. They design products specifically for different market segments, but they will never reduce the price of their top-end products just to sell more. Yeah. That's not how that works. That goes against the mythology. That goes against the entire image, and they'd eat themselves. Yeah. Going back to cars as well, I think it's interesting to see the story around the Mini. BMW bought the Mini brand, and same with the Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle. The Volkswagen Beetle started as a commodity product back in the day, in the 30s and 40s.
Volkswagen.
Or people's car. But it's just funny, nowadays, I don't know if they still produce them, but they're not, you'd call an everyday car in terms of the pricing. These aren't cars that are being sold for $13,000, $14,000, $15,000. They're 3 times or twice that at least. So they become an aspirational product because of the image that's preceded where they're at now. So that's the only way you can really swap from one category to the next. That's just through market pressure and managing image. Same with the Mini. The Mini, the vehicles now are very expensive in terms of where they used to sit.
And they look entirely different.
They're massive.
They're fitted out.
Yeah.
They're beautiful leather. They're pointed. The quality is incredibly different to what the original Minis were, which were very basic.
Yes.
Same with the Volkswagen thing.
Yeah.
Metal dash and all the rest of it. You don't see any of that anymore. You might see reflections of it to try and tie the character back in, but it's a totally different beast.
But the new Minis, really, in that sense, these days are really the only manufacturers that are doing them are Hyundai, Kia, Toyota, maybe, because they're just getting the price well down, and their brand reflects that. So
nice. Well, good information there. I hope everyone's got a bit out of that. I certainly have learned a bit. Nice, thank you very much, Hamish.
Thank you.
Excellent.
You've been listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.